The House of Drear, Chapter 10, Part 3. "Yes, I saw them," said Mr. Small, and understanding Thomas so well, he added, "Don't make too much of it. Don't let your imagination play with your sense." "They wouldn't even look at us," said Thomas. "They were pretending we weren't even here." Mr. Small looked around. Folks were still staring at them while talking quietly. "That boy at the piano," Mr. Small said to Thomas. "He must be of the same family as the four men." Thomas couldn't believe he had heard right. "He's got the same head and the same build," continued Mr. Small. "Yes, they are a family, 5 of them. One of the 4 is the father." "But that's Mac Darrow at the piano," Thomas whispered. "That's the boy with Pesty and the horse yesterday." Mr. Small had been taking and engaging the feelings of the people around him. He had expected people to be standoffish at first. You could assume that of country people in the North, he told himself. He knew about their clannish history, which gave little room to strangers. But he hadn't expected folks to be as cold as they appeared to be in church today. When Thomas told him the boy at the piano was Mac Darrow, he at once sensed a hostility in the crowd. A moment before he had dismissed it as a product of his own frayed nerves. Now the minister entered and walked to the pulpit. After him came the young people's choir, taking their position behind and to his right. He was a short man, the minister. He was thin and not unpleasant looking, Thomas thought. The choir looked nice in blue robes. They saw Thomas and his family right away, and they stared with simple curiosity. The church grew still. There was the sound of horses' hooves in the distance. A lazy breeze filtered through the open window to the Smalls' pew. It hardly touched Thomas before it died. The horses' hooves were closer, pounding forward. Something buzzed in Thomas's head. He was watching the minister and the choir. The minister seemed to be waiting. Looking down at his Bible, he seemed to be listening. The horses came to a halt at the side of the church. A horse, Thomas thought. Horses? Here? Not more than half a minute passed while all remained still in the church. The elderly women in the front row seemed to fan themselves harder. People looked down at their hands or their hymnals, but no one spoke. What's he waiting for? Thomas wondered, staring at the minister. Why doesn't the choir begin? There were noises in the vestibule. Thomas turned around, but no one else did, and he was embarrassed. The twins smiled up at him. They were settled and happy to be where they were, between Thomas and Mrs. Small. They were lulled into a pleasant frame of mind by the heat and stillness of this new place. Down the aisle, past the Smalls in their pew, came Pesty in her outrageous pink and white costume, and Mr. Pluto in his black cape and high hat. They made their way to the very first pew. Even though Thomas had known they were coming, he couldn't believe he was really seeing them. Pluto seemed tired. Pesty led him along. His hand rested heavily on her shoulder. There was a murmur which ran from the back of the church forward. Folks around the Smalls' pew grunted to themselves angrily. The minister looked hard at them, and they quieted. He followed the progress of Mr. Pluto, easing himself into that first pew. The old ladies there had moved far over to make room for him and to avoid him at the same time. They don't like him, but the minister says it's all right, Thomas thought. The minister is going to preach to the devil, and the folks don't like it one bit. Pesty did not sit down. She went around the pulpit, all daintiness, gathered a robe folded on a chair, and slipped the robe on. Then she took her place in the very front of the choir in the middle. Why do they let her be in the choir? She's too small, Thomas thought. 285, the minister said. His voice was a startling, deep bass. People stood up and opened hymnals. Thomas grabbed a hymnal from the basket attached to the seat back in front of him. He gave it to his father. Mrs. Small had taken another one for herself. They stood. The whole congregation was standing except for the twins and old Mr. Pluto. Pluto was bent over in his seat. From the rear, he looked as though he might be sleeping. He appeared tired out, not at all the man of the night before or even this morning. Mac Darrow played beautifully. Thomas recognized the hymn at once and smiled. He didn't have to look at the words, neither did Mr. Small. They closed the hymnal, and then they knew why Pesty was in the choir. It seemed to Thomas that Pesty's voice slid down from the ceiling, down the hot walls, and into Mac Darrow's hands. It seemed to him that Mac Darrow's hands were inside the sound of the choir, holding on to Pesty's voice and then letting go of it when it became too strong for them. Her voice was like no other Thomas could remember hearing. It was pure and strong, not like a child's, and it was sweet and good, like a girl's. Over my head I hear music in the air. Up above my head, I see trouble in the air. The congregation joined Pesty and the choir in a surge of new strength. There must be a God somewhere. The hymn went on and on. The minister sang part of it alone, with the choir and congregation humming softly. It was enough to cause chills to run down Thomas's spine. The minister had a voice finer than Pesty's, better than any voice outside of the stage. Mama is sure to come every Sunday, Thomas thought. She will say preacher has a voice good enough to speak with the Lord. Through it all, Mr. Pluto sat hunched over as though not listening. He didn't move the whole time. Thomas only half realized when the song ended. There was so much to watch and remember. He found himself sitting down and shushing the twins. They wanted more music. He promised them if they'd be still, there might be more in a few minutes. The choir had sat down. Pesty looked like a big doll in her long robe. Her bonnet looked pretty and not out of place. She was serious and sweet, sitting there in the midst of the older boys and girls. The minister spoke solemnly of a God somewhere. Thomas listened for a while. He talked about the Christian need to search out an invisible God in all things. Go to the rock, the minister said. Tell the sinner who hides his face on the rock that he need not. No, he need not. Tell him that he is God. Say to him that the rock is God. Tell him to love himself and the rock and you, for God is with you. I say, inside of you there is God. Inside of all of us, in all things, you will find God. Thomas stared at the still form of Mr. Pluto. Mr. Pluto's head nodded, and his high hat rolled from his lap into the aisle. The minister paused. A man got up and gingerly returned the hat to Pluto. He did not smile at the still form nor touch it. The still form did not react as if anything out of the ordinary had occurred. Is he sleeping there? Thomas wondered. Does preacher mean to find God in old Pluto? The minister droned on. Thomas stopped listening. He glanced out of the window. He could hear children playing somewhere down the street. They would be noisy until the church service was over, at which time they'd go home for dinner and more play. Is that all they knew how to do? Thomas felt a little tired. The excitement of the new church, the new minister, was wearing off. Somehow it was becoming confused with past Sundays in church. Irresistibly, his eyes were starting to close. 471. Thomas woke up with a start. He couldn't tell how much time had passed, but automatically he stood up. Why is church always the same? A while ago, I was glad it was the same. Sleepily, he tried to appear interested, but why must it be so slow and boring? Preacher walk, preacher talk, preacher eat with a knife and fork. The rhyme came to Thomas out of some mean memory of a long morning. I got a ticket to raffle, I got 2 tickets to sell, I got 3 pastors awaiting, 2 preach down in hell. Let the devil get ready, tell the devil his fate. I got 3 pastors a-coming to pass him the plate. Pesty's voice quivered high above the choir. King Jesus lit the candle by the waterside, so all the little children could be truly baptized. Mr. Pluto got on his knees in the aisle beside his pew. Thomas nearly choked. One of the ladies in the front row stared at Pluto with sheer malice. Mr. Small watched with grave concern. There was an angry stirring in the congregation. Honor, honor unto the dying day. One of those big men who must have been a brother to Mac Darrow came forward and tried, without touching him, to get old Pluto to get up. Darrow, sit down, the preacher commanded. This isn't no Baptist place, carrying on in the aisle, Darrow said. We're Methodists here. I said sit down. Mr. Pluto wants to kneel, let him kneel, the minister said. So come along, children, and be baptized. All the little children will be truly baptized. Honor, honor unto the dying day. When the hymn ended, the choir filed out. Pesty came forward and helped Mr. Pluto back into his seat. She squeezed in beside him and then watched the minister. The minister was clearly upset. Thomas hoped he would forget his lecture and maybe preach around what had just happened. He didn't much care for old Mr. Pluto, but he decided he liked that Darrow man even less. Somehow, he wanted the preacher to put the Darrow man in his place. Instead, the minister turned to his Bible again. He grew calm and he read for a long time, hardly noticing the people looking out of the windows. Thomas looked up at his father. Mr. Small's face was bemused. Becoming aware of Thomas staring, he gently patted Thomas's knee. All at once, Thomas felt totally let down. Everything had come to a standstill for some reason. he felt. All the hope of a new place, a new beginning, and a new happiness went out of him. Nobody will come home with us. No one will laugh and talk with Papa. I won't have anyone to show my carvings to. The church service was coming to an end. The collection plate was being passed around. They all stood to say the words that meant a parting. May the Lord watch between me and thee while we are absent one from another. Amen. Mac Darrow disappeared through a rear door, the way the choir had gone, before Thomas had a chance to catch his eye. All those boys in the corner milled around their parents before they all filed out. Thomas held one of the twins while Mrs. Small held the other. The minister had not even welcomed them from the pulpit. Perhaps he had forgotten, Thomas thought. But the minister did come forward to shake hands with Mr. Small. He was Reverend Breckenridge, he told them, and he was pleased to have them come. You are a historian, I hear, he said to Mr. Small. Yes, I'll be working here for a time, said Mr. Small. Folks were coming over to say a few words to their minister. In doing so, they were introduced to Mr. and Mrs. Small and Thomas. There were Henrys and Davises, there were Harrises and Browns, but that was all. If any of them had the least curiosity about Mr. Small leasing the house of Drear, he said nothing about it. The four big men, those Darrows, filed silently out without a word, even to the minister. You have yourself a good slice of history in that big house, the minister was saying to Mr. Small. I've always admired it. I don't have a family. However, I can't say I would care to live in it alone. He smiled pleasantly. A warning? Thomas wondered. We had a good turnout this Sunday, the minister went on. I haven't seen some folks who were here today in quite a while. Mr. Darrow and his sons I haven't seen in a few months, although the one son, MacDonald, plays piano for me each Sunday. It always surprises me how good weather will bring folks out more than anything I have to say. He laughed, amused at himself. Mr. Small watched him closely. I don't believe I've met the Darrows you speak of. Oh, you will meet them. You will get to know everyone. We are a small community here. Folks are a little shy at first, but they are good-hearted people. Awfully glad to have you among us. Thank you so much, said Mr. Small. Good luck to you all, and I do hope to see you next Sunday, the minister said. Mr. Small told him he would surely see them. Outside, some of the congregation were still gathered, talking with one another. As the Smalls emerged from the church, folks looked down at their feet or away to the street, as people will do when they are shy and cannot think of what to say. Mr. Pluto was just climbing into his buggy. He favored his lame leg considerably and fell heavily into his seat. Beside him was Pesty, and she smiled at Thomas. On seeing Mr. Small, Pluto touched his fingers to his high hat. His mind seemed to be on something other than passing the time of day with strangers. He went off the way he had come, with Pesty in the crook of his arms. I'll not wave to them, Thomas thought to himself. I'll not wave at the devil nor the devil's disciple. Folks moved away, got into cars, and went home. Mr. and Mrs. Small and Thomas, carrying the twins, walked slowly to their own car. No one to come home with us, not even Pesty. No one to listen to Papa and hear about all the lives of history. What kind of place is this North anyway? What kind of no-account place?